All right, so I am going to introduce our next moderator. Though he is the man that needs no introduction. He has an uncommon combination of talents rarely found in the real estate industry: an experienced technologist, skilled communicator, and accomplished business leader. He was the previous CEO of the Real Estate Standards Organization and is now the CEO of First Multiple Listing Service in Atlanta. So please help me in welcoming Mr. Jeremy Crawford.
So I'm so happy to hear about the new contest because I did play baseball back in the day, and I've got 2 pairs of socks, and I kind of thought maybe we should have a contest to see if we can knock the cameraman off of his stand back there. That seems like fun. But I see that Sean Dolphine out there wants a pair, so almost to him. Let's try him again. Ceiling got me, so. And then I also have a pair of Bose AR glasses. For these, you're going to have to stay for the panel because I'm going to give it away right before we go to the break. So that way you all can't sneak out early. But I want to go ahead and introduce our awesome panelists. First, Chris Wade. He is the Director of Data Services and Compliance at FMLS. And then we have Jason Graham from CREA, the Canadian Real Estate Association. He's Associate Director of Product. And then finally, many of you that have been around for a while know Rick Herrera, who's the Director of Data Services at Realtor.com. And if you don't know Rick, you've probably crossed paths with him at some area of the way with data issues at Realtor.com or new data feeds. So he does a lot of work in that space. So we're going to talk about extending upon what Stellar MLS, Melissa, and some of their discussions were with adopting standards. But we're also going to talk about not only the data dictionary, but the universal property ID. And right after the break, Mark Bessett's going to show a demonstration of what they're doing with the universal property ID. So I encourage you after the break to come back in and make sure you see that. And then also the organizational unique ID as well. So we're going to kind of touch on those 3 topics. And then with Jason, we're going to bring in a flair of international because we're not just in the U.S. with real estate. If you look at companies like Keller Williams and Realogy and others, Berkshire Hathaway, they do mega millions of dollars outside of the United States in transaction, and they bring that information back into the United States as they're doing their financials for the SEC, and it's important for them to have data portability all across the world, not just locally in the stateside, and Jason's been doing a lot of work in that space, if you will. So I want to really start kind of at the top with the universal ID and organizational unique ID. And start with Jason from that. Talk to us about, just from the high level, briefly, organizational unique ID, universal property ID, and kind of how that might apply in Canada, and also how the data flow is in Canada, because it'll kind of help them understand your business case.
Yeah, so maybe I can start with the data flow. So we're the equivalent of NAR, and we run Realtor.ca. So we're basically the national marketing site. It's the main one used by consumers in Canada. So one of our roles is aggregating all the data from the local boards into the national portal. So about 15 years ago, we set up essentially the same as what the data dictionary is. We call it our national data standard, and our own transport, which is very antiquated right now, FTP and text files. So when the data dictionary came along, that was a chance for us to update and modernize everything. The organization unique ID is something that we're interested in. There's a bit of concern over kind of ID confusion. There's IDs for organizations in the local systems, there's IDs at the national level. So I know our consumers of the data get confused about which ID do we mean when we're talking. So eventually I think we will have to do that transition though. A lot of the companies we work with are used to working in the US. They're used to, the Rhetts standard instead of our national standard we've been using in Canada. So I think it makes sense for us to just go fully in the direction of the RESO standards. So OUID will definitely be part of that. The property ID for sure is one that we're interested in, especially for stuff like consuming historical data. How do we tie that together with active listings if all we know is addresses and the address standards have changed in the local systems over the years? So if we can have some sort of national system of using unique property IDs, that would be huge for us.
And if you're part of the international group and you're not involved in the Universal Property ID work group, they need your input because it's a great standard that is really solidified very well for the US, and they're wanting to make it more applicable to Canada and even other countries. So if you have information about those properties and how that works, talk with Mark Bessett. It's a great place to get involved. So I'm going to move over to Rick because Rick deals with a lot of overlapping market disorder. We cause him a little bit of that ourselves in Atlanta from that perspective. But you know what they do today, if you haven't paid attention, if they're getting listings that are from multiple sources and it's the same listing, you might start to see on a property detail page list 1, list 2, list 3 because they're displaying the same listing from multiple sources, you know, multiple times on the site to at least show what the data is looking like from each of those sources. But tell us kind of a little bit what you're doing with UPI, your own as well, and then looking at OUID from that perspective.
Sure. So yeah, I think both those solutions or both those technologies could actually help with identifying scenarios where you have multiple listings, the same listing from multiple MLSs. It is a common scenario. The Bay Area, Atlanta is certainly one of them. We created our own proprietary mechanism for property identification, so we tie all listings to a property quite a few years back, and it was quite a bit of work. So the fact that that tool is available now to help anybody that's new that's coming out, it's really a great tool that way. It can save people just a ton of work. Yeah, we do attach multiple listings to a property, and we do give consumers the opportunity to see each instance of it. That's the current model that we use today. We've had discussions about how to order this and what the right way to do it is. It's tough. We do try to be neutral to the industry and make sure every listing gets a chance to be displayed and seen so consumers really get a choice that way.
And there is a UPI generator that Mark and some others from the work group built out that's on RESO.org. So if you haven't seen it, you can go play with it and mess around with it and show exactly what the UPI is doing there. So obviously, Chris, from FMLS's world of overlapping market disorder, talk to what we're doing at FMLS to implement those two standards.
Sure. So we've already implemented UPID in our system right now. I did a check this morning just before coming down here. We've got it in approximately 12,000 active listings. They have the UPID in there out of approximately, I think, 25,000 residential listings. So it's, it's in there, it's working. The big challenge we have right now is because of our unique market, we've got multiple ways that listings are input into our system. We've got 3 right now. We've got another one coming on board soon. And the trick is, in order for us to generate that UPID automatically, the listing has to be auto-populated from the tax record, and the tax source has to have the APN correct. So that was one struggle that we initially had with some of our input vendors, but I think we've got most of that worked out. It's looking good now. But then when the agent goes in and they don't use the tax to auto-pop the listing details, we're not capturing that tax data, and then we can't generate the UPID. So phase 2 is we're trying to look now, how can we go in behind the scenes after the listing's been input, tie it to a tax record, how confident are we in that connection to the tax record, and then do we want to generate the UPID and stick it in there. So that's kind of the big struggle we're at right now is figuring that part out. As far as OUID, right now we use that to identify us as the data source. When you pull a data, you'll see that we've got our OUID in there as the source. And honestly, I could talk for probably an hour just on all the cool things I think we could use OUID for, all theoretical. And as just about everybody in this room knows, you can come up with a technical thing that seems super easy, and then you go to implement it, and the actual implementations, that's the tough part. So, but that's where we're at right now with all that.
And if you all aren't aware, RESO.org has an organizational unique ID database. That's the master database. So every one of you in this room should have an OUID already assigned to you. Go look yourself up. Go make sure it's accurate. If it's not, let the RESO staff know, because we want that to be a resource. And if there's companies you get data from and they're not in there, submit that to RESO, because that's a growing set of technology companies, MLSs, and associations are in there too. So you can actually tie 17 associations back to the single MLS that might serve them, and you can see all that information. It's open source and it's there as a utility for the public. So make sure you leverage that and make sure your own information's there and up to date as well from that perspective. So I want to jump back into Data Dictionary, because we've got a little bit more details about how that's being implemented across these organizations, but also what they're doing in Canada from that perspective. And so I also will touch on Web API within the respect of that. So Jason, kind of want to hit on you first as to what you're doing internally with Data Dictionary, but then what you see from the board's perspective that you aggregate the data and where they're going from there.
Yeah, so we have two sides. We're both an aggregator and a distributor. So as a distributor, that's the first place that we decided to bring in the Data Dictionary. It was actually version 1.0 had just been made official. I think it was right before the Salt Lake City RESO conference. So we implemented it. We were super proud of it. You know, we're as modern as we can get. This just passed a month ago. I think the dictionary at that point was just defining the column names. So we defined that. We put it out. We started having clients adopt it. I went to the conference and realized that, you know, it's official, but it's still going to move a lot. Because I think one of the first statements, I don't know if it was Rob or someone else, saying, you know, we can change if there's major issues. And I'm like, uh-oh, that's a problem. So we're still on Data Dictionary 1.0. So we've been kind of waiting for it to hit the point where we're confident enough that now we're going to make the major change. So part of that is getting rid of our legacy Rhetts-based system and Data Dictionary 1.0. We're going to jump straight to Web API for our next version of distribution. And then we'll operate both in parallel and at some point force the users to move over. It saves a lot of hassles of trying to retrofit our Rhetts standard to use the Data Dictionary. The Web API gives a lot more flexibility on that. And then on the incoming side from the local boards to our system, we're doing the same thing. We had debated, do we keep our own national data standard that's been working and, you know, is fully enumerated, and build our own updated transport, you know, our own APIs. The major challenge there was that the MLS vendors that work in Canada, it's painful for them to support. Even though, you know, it already exists, they have to kind of do custom integrations with us. So we've made the decision as well to go straight to Web API for that. So right now it's a matter of waiting for the actual boards to give us Web API Platinum certified feeds. One of the other things we've done, we've made a decision to be very strict about the Data Dictionary. So even though it allows for flexibility and extensibility, our kind of theory is that we only map what's in the Data Dictionary. And if there's something missing, don't just extend and customize your own, because a year later there may be a different definition for it. So we're trying to make sure we're actively involved in, you know, filling those gaps and defining fields that don't exist yet that we need.
And you all did your own API connector, correct? To start pulling data from the boards once they're there, that's your plans?
Yeah, so we've built 80% of it. Our problem is we don't have an actual board to connect to yet, so a lot of it is all theoretical. So
and one of our conversations, and so for the companies that are newer to the real estate industry and pulling data, you kind of have a leg up on some that have built a lot of applications around Rhetts based upon the API, but yeah, you're looking at around 5 years from now, most of these boards will leapfrog from Sheets and FTP directly to the API and skip Rhetts altogether.
Yeah, so we know it takes a while for this kind of major change. We have some very small boards that just have, you know, part-time technical staff, so it's hard to just set a deadline of by Christmas you need to be, you know, fully Web API compliant. So we know it's going to be a long-term project where we'll have to support both. The other thing we've realized is that our internal database structure is all based on our old national data standard. And as someone in the earlier panel mentioned, it doesn't make sense to take a Data Dictionary feed, convert it to native, convert it back out on the way out. So we know the writing's on the wall. At some point we'll have to restructure everything internally to just store it in pure RESO Data Dictionary.
Awesome. So Rick, let's talk about what Realtor.com does internally with Data Dictionary, and then what would be kind of idealistic, from the industry side of the Data Dictionary, feature sets that you see, these, multiple copies, kind of that topic.
Sure. We were early adopters for Data Dictionary. I was actually part of the team that worked with Rob and many events over at FMLS to kind of get it off the ground and get it rolling. That move at Realtor, we basically have our internal dictionary, which the base of it was the RESO Data Dictionary. And we made a few modification tweaks to suit our business. A couple years ago, I did a presentation where I basically showed how we take any feed we get today and we convert it over to RESO Data Dictionary, and that's how we map it. I think there's a lot of opportunities for other people to do that as well. So that's sort of where we're at right now. We've been big proponents of it from day one.
And I like to tell a little precursor story before I hit Chris up on Data Dictionary. But as I was house hunting in Atlanta, starting there February 11th, my real estate agent, she said, I got this email about this Data Dictionary conversions thing on February 6th. Don't you want to wait till you start there? And I said, oh no, you let that conversion go way ahead of me before I get there on board. So while I'd like to say I would take credit as for FMLS's efforts that Chris is going to talk about, it was done in advance of my arrival, and conversion was done actually a week before, and no one burned our building down. So Chris, can you talk about where FMLS is on implementing Data Dictionary?
Sure. So right now we're Platinum certified in our native Rhetts server. And really that conversion, I would say we started back in 2016. Not only are we unique in our market that we have such a huge overlap, we're actually a privately held MLS. So when NAR came out in 2016 and said you have to have these Data Dictionary certified feeds going out, I think it was maybe middle 2016, we didn't have to do that, and so we didn't make a quick jump to turn around and find some translation to be able to send these feeds out. But what we did do is we turned around and we looked at the Data Dictionary real hard and said, is this a standard that we think has value? And we decided it was, and so we said, well, how do we do it natively? And so early 2017, we started mapping and mapping and mapping. And I think for probably a year and a half, every week, there'd be a group of 5 or 6 of us. We'd go get in the boardroom until we could not stand each other anymore, and just mapping fields back and forth, back and forth. And it wasn't difficult in that it was new data. It was just, if the Data Dictionary does it, you do it the dictionary way. We did a lot of stuff that the dictionary did just very differently. So we spent a lot of time saying, well, now we need to move all of these data points to this field, or we need to create this new field and move this one data point here. But now that we've created this whole new field for a data point, on the top of my head, other structures is one. We had a shed just in lot features, and the dictionary says, no, that's an other structure. So now we've got other structure with shed in it. Well, what else should we put in there so we don't have this one field with one option? And so that's what a lot of our conversion involved too, is what are these new things that the dictionary does, these new data points that would make sense in our market? What can we go ahead and add while we're in here? So in 2017, we did 3 publishes, and I apologize to everybody downstream. We did 3 publishes, about 50 changes each, and those publishes, we did not hear a peep from our membership. And that's kind of what we were testing the waters on. We were curious to see how many of our agents and brokers would turn around and say, this is dumb, this doesn't make sense, why are you changing everything? And we did not hear a peep. So 2018, we said, all right, we're going to get serious. And we had 2 big publishes. The first publish, I think, we had about 600 changes that went out. Again, I apologize. And then the second change, we actually spun up in October, November, the new Data Dictionary server. We sent out the link to all of our vendors and said, hey guys, go in here, check it out. These are the final changes that you're going to see on the server. Test it, break it, let us know what works, what's not working. And we found a few different places where the data was a little funky, and that we got it all squared away. And then I think February 5th was our actual, or February 9th, right in there is when we actually cut off our old Matrix Rhetts server and went to this new data server. And I mean, the only complaint we had from our members was an oversight on our part. and it had to do with the statuses. We dropped the MLS statuses altogether. We went straight to the standard statuses, and we decided not to use active with contract to replace our contingencies. We just got rid of the contingency kickout altogether, and that's been the pain point out of the entire conversion. That is the one place that I think we've had some second thoughts on, and we're revisiting that. But aside from that, our members, they didn't complain. A couple of them were kind of concerned. A lot of office managers were kind of freaking out. What's going to happen? What do I do? It's like, it's fine. It all makes sense. And that's kind of the consensus with our membership as they looked at it and say, oh, you know what, this makes sense. Because we had some pretty wacky stuff from years and years, I'm sure like every other MLS, of you get one or two high-profile agents make a field request, and all right, well, we'll throw it in there. And so this kind of made us reevaluate all that, kind of scrub those out. And all in all, I mean, our members seem to be really happy about it or not even know what happened. And that's, I think that's a pat on the back of a lot of our staff, that a lot of our members just even know what happened. Yeah.
And we actually, in that final conversion, there was a 30-day notice given out to all the data consumers. And out of over 200 data consumers, we actually only had a couple that didn't hit the deadline to convert on the final conversion. Mm-hmm. And now going forward, what I see as a benefit is if someone calls and asks for some wacky field, we go to Rob and say, Rob, what are we going to do about this wacky field? Since he's the data dictionary expert, but we just follow what's in the data dictionary. Absolutely. And I mean, having just standard status has been awesome. So nice. Yes, we will add back active under contract because it is a standard status. But other than that, I mean, it's amazing how the phones are just not ringing about it. Yep. And now the agents are seeing on the listing input sheet what they see more consistently when the data gets to Realtor.com at the same time.
Yeah, there are hundreds and hundreds of statuses, raw statuses that we see across, and we've got to kind of bring it back into the dictionary as well. It's a challenge.
Would you like everyone to be standard status?
Absolutely. It makes the process of search a lot easier.
Is Bertha in the room? Where's Bertha at?
No, she's not here.
She's not here. I think she would sleep much better at night. Yeah. If you all don't know Bertha, she's kind of behind the scenes expert in a lot of the data aspects at Realtor.com. Been there a long time. So, all right, we're going to kind of wrap up here from the panel perspective, and then I'll open it up quickly for questions. I see everyone sitting here for those AR glasses, if nothing else. So, Jason, kind of internationally, what was the one big ticketed item you and I talked about? For those of you who aren't aware, the data dictionary has been converted into Spanish. There's 6 MLSs that went out and funded that initiative, so it's actually available in Spanish. It's professionally converted, so those that want to take the fields and those values, pick list values, it's available now in Spanish. But Jason, let's kind of touch on your area and what you all would like to see for the future that might help.
Sure. So when we were debating, do we extend our old national data standards and build our own API or use the RESO Web API Data Dictionary model, one of the biggest challenges we identified is how are we going to deal with French. In our old model, every enumeration we have, there's an English and French equivalent for every value. So the boards send us a code and we can display it in English or French. We can distribute it in English or French to other sites. The free text values, those are a challenge because most agents will only enter one description, not 2 or 3 or 4. But we want to make sure we can support it as the national organization. We have to make sure we support it. Certain, as people that know Canada, Quebec is very heavily French, where that's the primary language of the users. The rest of the country is mainly English, and then there's a few pockets that are more bilingual. So we want to make sure that whatever we build can support both of those. So that's probably the biggest challenge. The Spanish implementation I've seen is adding more columns. I'm not sure that solves the enumeration issues, because ideally people should be able to call and be able to choose which language they get those enumerations in.
Okay, great. And Rick, we kind of talked about levels of certification and the benefits. What would your suggestion be for the group as they get confused a little bit about platinum versus gold, but what do you see that would be the biggest help for your aspects?
Yeah, so even today, I mean, the dictionary's been out for quite a while. RESO has kind of helped push certification levels, from bronze to silver to gold. We're starting to see the platinum certifications come in, and that's what we're always looking for. We want to have the richest listing possible, the most features, the most attributes. And so that's really at a platinum level. We still see a mix of it today, but it is trending in the right direction. One of the things I've heard a lot of from the past session and even now is the struggles in getting converted over to Data Dictionary. I know for us, we basically took all the mappings we had originally from all the source fields. So for status, we had hundreds of them, and we mapped them to our common set. We applied machine learning to kind of do auto mapping for us through this across all the data sets that we have. And so I wonder if, as RESO, there's opportunity to maybe find a way to help companies do this a little bit easier, a little simpler. So maybe that's an R&D discussion, but I think there's probably opportunities there to help other companies do this in a simpler, more streamlined fashion. Maybe it doesn't quite have to be so painful. It's already been done by a lot of people. So.
Yeah, so if everyone was platinum, you'd be smiling more and sleeping
Absolutely.
more.
When we get a reconvert, we get a changeover, we know it's going to be platinum. We know the consistency is going to be there, the quality is going to be there. The implementation time is so much faster. When we did the demo here a couple of years ago, I think it was MRED, and we basically on stage in 30, 45 minutes, we basically auto-mapped the whole thing because it was a platinum MLS.
Yep. If you're not platinum, Greg at the certification room outside can help talk to you about what that means. There's more fields and values, and then there's a tighter implementation of the standard at the same time. So he can help you get there, and then Rick will buy you beer for doing so.
Deal.
Chris, any final lessons learned about doing the native conversion? And FMLS is at the platinum level, and we're working ready for 1.7. But any lessons learned from the implementation from that area?
Sure. So I would say call Melissa if you have questions. Down at Stellar, that's what we did. As we were working through it, we got close, and it's always nice to have industry peers that are kind of in the fight with you. And I would say, if anybody is wanting to do that, I love to talk about this stuff. So, but as far as lessons learned for us, I think the biggest lesson that we learned is that nobody knows your data like you know your data. Nobody's going to map the data as well as your people will map the data. And that's not a slight or a shot at any of, CoreLogic or any of the APIs, Bridge, where they're mapping data and sending it out. That's not a slight, because I couldn't imagine the amount of stuff that they have to map. But that's something we learned when we were doing it, is there was a lot of things that, every market's local, and even though the dictionary is a national standard, there's still going to be some locality that every MLS has to deal with. And this is, in my opinion, doing it natively. That's the best way to make sure that you follow the standard, but then you can still also kind of keep your little bit of locality and identity that you need for your agents.
Yeah, and we do have Rhetts update. So being native Data Dictionary is going to help you pave the way for bidirectional data within the scope of the standard. So those of you that are thinking long-term about the update API, that's where you also need to seriously think about native Data Dictionary, so you're supporting the bidirectional aspect of the data with the standard, because that's going to help pave the way from a schema perspective. Any questions from the room? Any questions for any of our great panelists? Stan.
Hey, Chris, if you have a general sense or a number overall?
I wouldn't say that we necessarily reduce fields, because we did have to add a fair number of fields, and then a lot of them we just kind of changed the name. So unfortunately, I don't have a good sense on what the field count was initially versus what it is now. Just because it's one of those things too, as we're going through, like I said, there's some things that the Data Dictionary does that we never really thought of doing. And we said, well, this is the perfect time to implement it. And then there were those cases like, other structures. It's like, well, we got shed and that's it. What else can we put in there? So I would say probably the fields might have actually increased slightly, but that's complete conjecture until I could get in and look at the mapping documentation, to be honest with you.
How much total time did you give the vendors?
So once the new server was up, we let them in late October with a projected cutoff initially of January 15th. And then we actually ended up pushing that out to January 31. And then we rolled our system over February 6th, I think. So we tried to give about 4 months. And then usually whenever we have a publish, we try and let everybody know 30 days in advance, at least. If it's a big one, we try and give more lead time, but that's, with that server cutover, we tried to make sure that there was plenty of time where both were running in tandem to let everybody get in there and look at it, because we did find problems in the server, and you guys found problems in the server and told us about them, then we had to get CoreLogic to address them. So, but that was the rough timeline there.
Other questions? Awesome. Well, I want to have applause for our panelists here. And so, without further ado on the prize, because we know that's why you're all in the room. So we're going to do, after this, we're going to take a short 15-minute break, and then please come back to watch Mark Bessett show some things about the Universal Property ID, how it's working, but some of the future potentials. Tommy Coffey. Tommy, are you in the room? Tommy wins the Bose AR headsets. Thank you all so much.